When I turned 18, my life took a difficult turn. My parents, Rachel and Gregory, and my twin sister, Olivia, decided there wasn't enough space for me at home, essentially forcing me to leave. For the next few years, I struggled with an unstable life, moving from one temporary living situation to another, even living in a tent at one point. I did whatever I could to get by. Despite these challenges, I eventually built a stable life and was able to buy my own house. Now, at 26, just as I've gotten my life in order, my family has suddenly appeared. Led by Olivia, who is now expecting her fourth child, they showed up at my door unannounced, looking to move in. This is the same sister who once pushed for me to be kicked out, saying there wasn't enough room for both of us in our childhood home. Growing up, I always felt like I was treated as less important than Olivia. It was clear Rachel and Gregory preferred her, and they even admitted they wouldn't have had me if Olivia hadn't been conceived. She was always the center of attention, getting all the best toys and clothes, while I barely received enough to keep up appearances. Olivia has always shown selfish, narcissistic traits, likely because of how her parents favor her. Instead of being a supportive sibling, she consistently brought me down. The only person who ever treated me kindly in our family was my grandfather, Edward. He saw how unfairly I was treated, but when he passed away when I was 15, the last bit of kindness in my home disappeared. When Olivia got pregnant as a teenager, Rachel and Gregory married her off to her boyfriend, Liam, and brought him to live in our already crowded house. This left me without even a couch to sleep on. My dad, Gregory, sometimes slept on the living room couch, so that wasn't an option either. With nowhere else to go and being told not to ask relatives for help so the family's dysfunction would stay hidden, I was completely forced out. I ended up living in a tent in our backyard, which happened after the police mistakenly brought me home during a brief period of homelessness. This setup was meant to be a reward for keeping quiet about the reality of my living situation. After years of struggle and hard work, I finally managed to improve my life both physically and emotionally. Now, as my family tries to intrude on the life I've carefully built, I'm at a crossroads, unsure how to deal with their unexpected and unwelcome return. They had once offered me a spot to live in their backyard, but only if I cleaned it up first. Despite the mess, which was littered with flour, sugar, and overrun by rodents, I accepted. At one of the lowest points in my life, I saw this as an opportunity and quickly moved in. Olivia, on the other hand, was relieved to see me go, pointing out that there wasn't enough room for me at her place. No one even asked where I was planning to go. Transforming the backyard into a livable space was tough, especially dealing with the rodent problem, but I eventually made it work. Unfortunately, the situation forced me to drop out of high school just a few months before my final exams. My friends encouraged me to stay in the backyard and finish school, but by that time, I had already given up on that path. Instead, I focused on working, relying solely on my earnings to get by. Before long, I realized I needed to improve my skills for a better future. Gregory was a service technician, and as a kid, I often played with his tools instead of toys, helping him with household repairs. That early experience came in handy later as I decided to invest in my education and eventually got a job at a car manufacturing plant. I worked hard and steadily climbed the career ladder until I became a design manager. Recently, an old friend, Ethan, who was going through a divorce, needed to sell his house quickly. Even though I was hesitant at first, the huge discount and flexible payment plan he offered were too good to pass up, so I decided to buy it. I bought a 4-bedroom house and moved in about 3 weeks ago. To my surprise, my estranged family showed up unannounced at my new home. I hadn't had any contact with them for years, and I lived 17 miles away, so their visit was completely unexpected. I suspect a neighbor who still follows me on social media might have told them where I live. When they barged in, Rachel and Gregory expressed pride in my accomplishments, but it felt strange to see them react to me owning a house at 26, especially since they were still renting. Olivia and Liam wandered around the house as if they were inspecting it to move in. When I confronted them, they vaguely claimed they were just checking on me. It was ironic that they suddenly showed interest in my life, now when I didn't need them anymore. During their visit, Olivia boldly claimed a bedroom for herself, excited about the private bathroom, as though it was already decided that they would move in. Gregory and Rachel tried to calm her down, asking her to manage her children better. In the middle of this chaos, I was shocked and immediately shut down any discussion about them moving in. The situation quickly escalated as they started pushing the idea that I had a moral obligation to house Olivia because of family duty. I stood my ground, reminding them that it was their responsibility, not mine, to provide for their children. I firmly told them to leave my home, making it clear that I wouldn't feel guilty for their poor planning or lack of space. As they left, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I was living on my own terms, free from the pressure of their unwanted expectations. I recalled how, back when I was younger, my grandfather Edward allowed my cousin to sleep on the couch, but when I asked for the same favor, he refused and kicked me out. I vented about how I had struggled, living with rodents in my employer's garage and then in a cramped apartment for 10 years, but no one from my family ever checked on me. When I shared these memories, Rachel began to cry and try to hug me, but I stopped her and insisted they leave. Liam, my brother-in-law, told me to toughen up, bringing up his own hard times and saying I had more than enough space in my house since I was single. I sharply told him to stay quiet. Olivia cursed at me for raising my voice at her husband, but I stood firm and told them they needed to leave or things would escalate. I made them leave before they could argue back. My anger was clear. I had endured their toxic and selfish behavior for too long, and now their greed was obvious. I was no longer the obedient teenager they used to manipulate. If they had pushed any further, I was fully prepared to involve the police. To clarify, Olivia never once offered to pay rent. She and Liam had been freeloading off Rachel and Gregory for over a decade, and now they seemed determined to do the same with me. Despite the clear strain this put on Rachel and Gregory, they never took any steps to encourage Olivia to become independent. Instead, they tried to dump the responsibility onto me. A week after our first confrontation, Rachel returned, but this time she was more direct. She argued that my home had enough room to house Olivia and her family, again mentioning how crowded things were at their place. I stayed firm in my refusal. When persuasion didn't work, she shifted to veiled threats, implying that my large, mostly empty house was a security risk and that having family around would be safer and helpful with household chores. I dismissed her manipulative tactics and told her clearly to leave and not come back. Just a few days later, a neighbor informed me of suspicious activity around my house. He said he had seen a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy peering through my windows and hanging around the backyard, likely trying to break in. I was grateful for his vigilance, gave him my contact information, and asked him to keep an eye on things. I had planned to install security cameras, but unfortunately, I didn't act fast enough. 5 days later, the same neighbor called to say he thought someone had broken into my home. When I rushed back, I found out he was right. Olivia and Liam had entered through a rear window. When I confronted them, Olivia tried to justify their actions, claiming they had no other choice and accusing me of being unreasonable. As I processed her audacity, Liam smugly commented on how easy it had been. I lost my temper and physically confronted him. Olivia tried to get between us, and in the chaos, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, leaving me bleeding. The situation spiraled out of control, and Olivia called Rachel and Gregory, telling them I was the aggressor. When the police arrived, they began sorting things out while Olivia and Liam frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son. Despite their pleas, I was ready to press charges against all of them. However, Olivia denied the break-in and assault, claiming it was just a family visit gone wrong and that her son's actions were only a prank. When Rachel and Gregory arrived, they immediately took Olivia's side, pressuring me to drop the charges. They banded together to defend her and tried to make me out to be the vindictive one. Faced with their collective denial and manipulation, I realized they were determined to gaslight me into submission. I was determined not to let my family rewrite the narrative of what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor stepped forward with a crucial statement, which ultimately led to the arrest of everyone involved in the assault. They spent the night in jail because Rachel and Gregory couldn't afford their bail. The next morning, while they faced trial, I was at the hospital getting treated for my injuries and making sure there were no internal damages. I took a few days off to recover and press charges for assault, also seeking compensation for my legal fees, which the court granted. Despite Rachel and Gregory's attempts to persuade me to drop the charges, I stood firm. I even threatened legal action against them for their role in orchestrating the attack. Since my nephew is a minor, he was dealt with under juvenile law and only spent a short time in a juvenile facility, with his parents held responsible for restitution, lost wages, and covering my medical expenses. Olivia and Liam were fined heavily. In an attempt to ease their financial burden, they asked the court to allow them to complete part of their fine through community service. Since the incident, things have been relatively quiet. I hope Olivia and Liam have learned their lesson and will keep their distance. However, Rachel and Gregory haven't let this go. Just yesterday, they showed up at my door and waited outside for an hour until I reluctantly let them in. They pleaded for my help, but when it became clear they were speaking on behalf of Olivia, I immediately refused to get involved. That's when they revealed their real reason for visiting. They were getting older, their home was falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me, expecting me to take them in out of duty. I confronted them about their lack of responsibility as parents. They mentioned the idea of giving their house to Olivia, which I saw as another tactic to pressure me. They even suggested that Olivia could pay rent to live in my house, and that I could use it to cover my mortgage. I firmly declined, stating that Olivia needed to handle her own financial problems without my involvement. They continued to plead, arguing that my house was too big for just one person. But I made it clear that my future plans didn't involve staying single or accommodating them out of obligation. Their attempts at emotional manipulation didn't work. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past and emphasized that I would not be guilted into giving in. It was obvious they were trying to use family ties to their advantage, but I remained firm in setting boundaries to protect my well-being. After they left, visibly upset, I closed the door behind them. Regardless of whatever names they might call me, I resolved not to give in to their demands or let them take advantage of me. This experience has been a harsh reminder of how toxic and manipulative my family can be. Despite their actions, I refuse to let them drag me back into the chaos I've worked so hard to escape. I've built a life of independence and stability, and I intend to keep it that way. Now, I'm ready to move on to the next chapter in my life, stronger and wiser from this experience. I've decided to install security cameras to ensure my home remains my sanctuary and to prevent any further intrusions. No matter how hard they try, I am determined to protect the life I've created for myself. It's not just about keeping them out, it's about finally putting myself first.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The best part about attending my wife's office party was the opportunity to push my Challenger to its limits. The downside was that the faster I drove, the quicker I'd arrive. The event was at a cabin in the woods, and there was this perfect 20-meter stretch of road leading up to it. No stop signs, no lights, no traffic, just an open road waiting for the Dodge to unleash its power. The downside? No gas stations or Jiffy stores along the way. Diana and I had been drifting apart ever since our daughters got married. Though I had hoped things would go in the opposite direction, Diana insisted I come to the ceremony, even though I made it clear I wasn't interested. She used to go alone. Diana liked to drink, but I didn't. I'd occasionally have a beer, but that was it. She was a social butterfly, and I wasn't. Over the past year, I had a gut feeling she was having an affair. By this point, I didn't care. In fact, I think that's part of what caused us to drift apart. I was just biding my time, waiting for a way out of an unhappy relationship. I have to admit, I was probably a big reason Diana went looking for something more. I'm a minimalist of sorts. I grew up in a poor family where my brothers and I had far less than other kids our age. Things like bicycles, toys, pets, and fancy electronics. It was almost like living Amish, minus the religion. I wasn't ignorant. I understood how the world worked, but I couldn't bring myself to accept it. I knew it was important to stay out of debt, pay bills, and save for retirement to live comfortably. As a minimalist, you don't have to be extreme, but you do have to keep yourself in check while allowing yourself a few indulgences to appear normal to most people. My biggest struggle was marriage and family. I had a tough time finding a woman who could tolerate my eccentricities and accept my uniqueness. Diana came from a similar background and was used to living modestly, though she didn't embrace it the way I did. Over time, though, she adapted. As the years passed, she became less frugal, and while I didn't like it, I understood. Especially after the girls were born. We bought a small, practical house and started dressing better. Diana got her hair done more often and became skilled at grooming and makeup. We upgraded to the latest smartphone models, and as the girls grew older, Diana took a minimum wage office job. We needed transportation, so we bought her a small Honda Civic, just like mine. Her salary almost covered the car payment, lunch, and a new wardrobe. My name is Edward Adams, one of the most common names around. I work for a local company that makes industrial compressors. It's a monotonous job, but I'm content with it. The position and pay are fine. Sometimes, I was offered promotions, but I turned them down. I never told Diana about my second affair. I kept it to myself. I felt it was smart to save for retirement whenever I could, so I invested in gold, 1-ounce Krugerrands. I had more than 30 of them stored away in a safe, and I was just getting started. Finally, I let myself indulge in a 1970 Dodge Challenger. Diana did well at Kingston Industrial and received regular bonuses and promotions. The first year, she talked about her job a lot, but eventually, she stopped mentioning it altogether. I knew something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. Tonight, I was hoping to get a better understanding of the situation. The party was a weekend event, and I felt out of place just being there. I had dated all of her co-workers at some point, and I didn't like any of them. We pulled off the highway in Holbrook, and I finally let the Challenger open up. Diana was uncomfortable with the speed, but she kept quiet. Yes, I was speeding, but I didn't care. Bill, what's the rush? We've got plenty of time to get there. Why don't you slow down a little? She asked. I'm not in a hurry to get there, I replied. You know damn well I didn't want to go at all. I'm just using this time to clean the engine. A car needs a good run every now and then, so please try not to spoil my mood. This weekend is important for my career. Why? What do you mean by that? Why is it so crucial for me to attend this corporate event? Bill, you need to understand my new role at the company so you can give me the support and attention I need to do my job. I still don't get it. I'm sure Mrs. Thompson will be able to explain it to you once we get there. Mabel Thompson was the wife of the company president, Grant Everett Thompson. They were old money, old business. I've always supported you, though. What's changed? My new position has a lot of unique responsibilities. Mabel said you should gradually familiarize yourself with them so you can fully understand. It might be difficult at first, but she assured me you'll get the hang of it by the time we arrive. By the time we got to the lodge, my adrenaline was through the roof. It didn't take a genius to figure out what Diana was trying to say. The weekend was shaping up to be interesting. When we arrived, Diana entered the lodge, leaving me to carry the bags. I felt like I'd been put on display. Hey, nice wheels, Mr. Adams. It was Travis Morgan, the only decent worker in their office. Hello, Travis. How's it going? Travis introduced me to his wife, Lila. They were sitting on the front porch, while everyone else seemed to be inside. I glanced around the parking lot, noting about 16 cars and one old truck parked at the end of the lot. For the next 5 minutes, we talked about the Challenger. What are you doing outside? Why aren't you and Lila inside with the others? They're not our kind of people, Mr. Adams. We were hoping to leave early, but Mrs. Thompson insists we stay. We came in early to help set up, and the vendors left about an hour ago. You'll have to explain what's going on. Something feels off, but I don't know exactly what it is. I don't want to upset you, but I think it has something to do with your wife. Are you staying the whole weekend? No, that's why I parked my truck on the side of the road, so I don't have to worry about it when we leave. This was getting more interesting by the minute. All right, I better get these bags to our room. Let me know before you leave, okay? Sure, Mr. Adams. Be careful. Don't do anything stupid. Fortunately, it was only 2 small bags. As I walked into the cabin, Mrs. Thompson caught my eye, smiled, and waved. Diana was waiting for me at the top of the stairs, looking a little annoyed that it had taken me so long to get inside. It's about time, Bill. We have a few hours to get ready for tonight. Clean up and put on something presentable. It's going to be a special night, and I want it to be perfect. If you don't mind, I'm going to take a walk around the house to calm down. I'll be right back. I smirked as I left the room. The slight chill made my walk more pleasant. By my count, there were indeed 16 cars. Most of them were Mercedes, with a few Jaguars and Lexuses. 4 of the cars had out-of-state plates. I was confused. How could my wife, or rather, we, fit in with people of this caliber? We were definitely out of our depth here. Something wasn't right. I noticed Travis and Lila loading their bags into the truck. I waved and walked over to chat. I see Mrs. Thompson has decided to let you go. Not quite. We're kind of slipping away. I'm not comfortable here, Mr. Adams. Travis thought about staying, but I talked him out of it, Lila said quickly. Could you do me a small favor and stay here until after the buffet tonight? I'm a little nervous, and I'd really appreciate it. I had no idea what was going on, but I didn't like it. Great minds think alike, don't they, Lila? I said, trying to make light of it, though my humor was weak. She blushed slightly. I think I can manage. There'll be crabs and oysters, I added. Sounds good, Travis said. I dressed as Diana had insisted, and before we reached the buffet, the hostess took me aside. We're so glad you decided to come tonight to support Diana. This is a big step in her career, and it's important that she has your full support. The pay and benefits increases are significant, and I'm sure you'll be pleased with that. Pardon me for asking, but what position are we talking about? Diana was a little evasive when I asked her about it. She usually just waves me off and says to wait until tonight. It's okay, Edward. I think she just wants to surprise you. You didn't answer my question. There's no official title. I suppose you could just call her the personal assistant. I see. Well, the buffet looks great. Thank you for explaining. Mrs. Thompson. Mabel, please. Just call me Mabel. I spent the next hour trying everything on the line. Diana was busy socializing with important people, so Travis, Lila, and I had some time to ourselves. We were just about to pack up when Mrs. Thompson entered. Edward, Diana mentioned you came by tonight in your sports car. Would you mind taking us for a little drive with a drink? I smiled and nodded. There are 3 cases of wine at the ABC store in Holbrook. They've already been paid for, so you just need to pick them up. There shouldn't be any issues, but if there are, just give me a call. Make sure you have your cell phone with you. I'd be happy to, Mabel. I'll let Diana know and head out soon. After she left, I turned to Travis. I'll meet you outside in 5 minutes. Diana only smiled when I told her that Mrs. Thompson had asked me to help. Her only comment was, don't forget your phone. Interestingly, both she and Mrs. Thompson had emphasized that. Travis, I need a favor, I said, tossing him the keys to the Challenger. Are you serious? He asked. Go to Holbrook and pick up the 3 cases of wine from the ABC store for Mrs. Thompson. I think there might be some delay, so if anything goes wrong, I want to be prepared. Travis smiled and nodded. Here's my cell. Just put it on the dashboard. If it rings, don't answer it. Don't turn it off either. Got it. How long do you need to be gone? At least 2 hours. Fill up on gas before you head back. Enjoy the ride. It was a little chilly outside, but I had put on a comfortable jacket. Now, all I had to do was wait and watch from various spots on the back porch. I could see most of the cabin's interior. A thermos of coffee would have been nice, but I hadn't thought ahead. I found a good spot to observe without being seen. Diana was the center of attention, laughing and embarrassing herself like a movie star. About 20 minutes later, Mrs. Thompson and Diana were looking at Diana's cell phone. I knew they were checking my location. Thanks to Travis, I'm almost to Holbrook. He must have texted them. They smiled as Mrs. Thompson raised her hand to speak. I couldn't make out what was said, but everyone in the room seemed to quietly approve, like soft applause. Grant walked over, took Diana's hand, and headed up the main staircase. At the top, they stopped, raised their hands as a victory salute, and laughed as they ascended. The room erupted in cheers. It was about an hour and a half before the Challenger returned. I decided to take my time. I always carried my trusty penknife with a sharp blade. I looked around and started with the cars closest to the house. No hurry. I carefully pocketed the valve stems, not wanting to lose anything and trying not to block the driveway with them. I had 16 cars and 64 valve stems to deal with. I had almost an hour left. What to do? 4 of the cars were locked, but the rest were unlocked. I started taking the registration papers from the glove compartments and visors. I didn't know what I'd do with them, but I figured they might come in handy someday. With 30 minutes to spare before Travis got back, I decided to strip the valve stems from the spare tires. I also had access to the trunks, so I spent the next 20 minutes collecting 10 more valve stems. 2 cars didn't have spare tires. I knew it was petty and childish, but it gave me a mild satisfaction. I wasn't a fan of confrontation, so I kept everything I did low and mean. I didn't need to prove myself. Let the alpha males take on that role. 20 minutes later, the Challenger returned. Travis and Lila seemed to have enjoyed the ride. Travis confirmed there had indeed been a delay at the ABC store, just as I had anticipated. It seemed it had been pre-planned. While they were gone, no one called my cell phone. I turned it off and removed the SIM card. They seemed eager to get home, so I thanked Travis, wished him a safe journey, and advised him to find another job as soon as possible. I was sure the wine cases had been quite expensive, But that problem was easily handled. I placed all 3 crates on the porch of the gatehouse. No way did I want to be accused of theft. The drive home was relaxing. There wasn't much in the house that was of importance to me. Just some personal papers, a laptop, and the Kruger. At first, I had planned to set the house on fire before leaving, but that would have turned Diana into a martyr, and I didn't want that. 2 hours later, I was on my way. I didn't feel the need to leave a traditional note or wedding ring. Let her deal with it herself. I wasn't in any rush and had no specific destination in mind. After being on the road for 2 days, Monday morning I called work to give notice and requested that my final paycheck be sent to my parents. They weren't happy about me leaving without any warning, but I apologized and didn't bother explaining further. A good breakfast at Waffle House was always a highlight, and on the way out, I bought a local newspaper. I found an ad for a local supermarket looking for help to load shelves between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. After breakfast, I checked out the market. It was located in a quirky old Chattanooga neighborhood, so I spent the next hour driving around. The area had a mix of old craftsman cottages and a few mobile homes. I could have been content in a small trailer, but I wanted to take it a step further. Then, I spotted a sign offering a garage apartment for rent. I hadn't yet inquired about the job, but I didn't want to miss the chance on the apartment. The garage wasn't included in the rent, but when I offered an extra $50 a month, they agreed. The apartment was small, a 1-bedroom with no shower, but it came furnished with a bed, dresser, table, and chairs. The rent was reasonable, and the place was adequate, so I decided to take it. I'd figure out the bathroom situation later. At least I had a garage for the Challenger. The job situation at the supermarket was a bit different. They had plenty of Challengers, but not enough to leave them overnight without concern. I explained my situation to the owner and didn't hold back. What finally secured the job for me was offering to work off the books, with no benefits, and at $1 less than they had originally offered. They didn't even ask for my social security number. I was happy, and they were happy. The job was a 10-minute walk from the apartment. The rest of the day was spent getting settled in my new home. The landlord gave me access to his internet, which was a nice touch. After a quick trip to the local Goodwill, I picked up some kitchen supplies and a small microwave. I also grabbed linens and cleaning supplies. That evening, I canceled my insurance policies. I decided not to deal with banks or credit cards. There wasn't much they could do, and I figured I'd avoid complications. Both of our daughters were married, which made my departure a little easier. No grandchildren yet, but I was sure it wouldn't be long. I called my daughter Nina to let her know I was okay, and asked her to help her mother if needed. Nina already knew I had left, but Diana hadn't shared any further details. She promised to inform her sister, Caroline. I deleted all calls from my wife and turned my phone off again. I needed a shower, maybe tomorrow. Things weren't perfect. I still needed to find a safe place for my gold. It wasn't essential, but it was important to me for some reason. I got a safe deposit box in Huntsville, Alabama, hoping it wouldn't be linked back to me in Chattanooga. Of course, I was wrong about that, but I figured it was worth trying. The drive was almost 2 hours, but that's what I expected. The garage door at the apartment was secure, but I added a new deadbolt and heavy-duty lock just to be safe. I needed protection. It didn't take long for me to settle into my new job. I had a man working with me for the first 3 nights, but after 2 weeks, I was on my own. Everything was under control by then. For $20 a month, I got a membership to Planet Fitness, which took care of my shower situation. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and after work, I either jogged for 20 minutes or walked for 30 to get to the gym. At first, I just used the showers, but eventually, I started using the exercise equipment. By the end of the first month, I was spending almost 2 hours at the gym every day. I felt better, lost a little weight, and was happy with my new routine. The job was monotonous, but it was different, and I enjoyed the freedom it gave me. I did my job and was left to my own devices. Without a TV, I used a secondhand desktop computer with a good monitor. I didn't cook much, but I noticed my eating habits had shifted toward a keto diet, though it wasn't intentional. After 3 months, I was feeling better and had lost some weight. It was time to reach out to my daughters. I called Caroline first. "Hi, Caroline, it's your father. Well, it's about time. We've all been worried about you. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, don't worry about me. I just wanted to check in on your mom. She's doing great. She got a promotion at work and loves her job. She's really mad at you, though. She said you left her at the celebration and then left the house like a hurt little boy. Those were her words. She said you were jealous of her success. I'm sorry, but that's all she's told me. She says things are tough without your income, but her raise is covering it. She's fine. Well, I'm glad she's doing well. Did she tell you anything about her new job?" Just that she's making more money and traveling a lot. I paused for a moment, then Caroline asked, "Are you coming home for Christmas?" "I don't think so. I'll try to send something for you and Nina." "We don't need anything, Dad. We'd rather have you here." "I'm sorry, Caroline. I've got to go. Say hi to Nina for me."
Bye.
I felt a bit depressed. It seemed like my daughters thought I was the cause of all the problems, but I didn't feel obligated to explain myself. Diana wasn't showing any remorse, and I couldn't understand why my daughters wanted me to come home. I spent the weekend feeling down, and my beer consumption was increasing. As the weeks went by, things were going well. I was doing a good job, and even got a promotion. I was given full discretion over my responsibilities, and in a short time, I had streamlined and improved the store's restocking system. The general computer system was already handling most of it, but they seemed to appreciate my manual input. My accommodations were perfect for my situation and well within my budget. My weight was dropping, and I was building muscle. My appearance was changing too, longer hair, a bit of a scruffy look, and I even began to question my six-pack of cans. At the gym, things were progressing. I was building muscle, and the workouts were getting easier. I also made a few acquaintances, but I was cautious around women. I didn't want any problems with their partners. One person, however, stood out. Her name was Henry, or at least that's what everyone called her. She was around 45, sturdy-looking, and always wore sweatpants and a sweatshirt. Unlike other women at the gym, she didn't show off her body in tight outfits. She was the only one who spoke to me, or even looked my way. I didn't encourage it, but I didn't push her away either. It was a little flattering. Several months went by without me contacting my wife or daughters. I made trips to Huntsville to add to my Krugerrand collection, but then something unexpected happened. One day, Henry came up to me at the gym. "Edward, can I talk to you for a minute?" It was unusual for her to use my full name. Everyone else called me Bill. Sure. What's up?" "I have a corporate meeting to attend Friday night, and I need an escort. I'll cover all expenses, and I need someone to come with me. I noticed you don't drive, so I'll provide transport, and if necessary, I'll reimburse you for any expenses." I was caught off guard. "I have a few skeletons in my closet, though," I admitted. "If you can get around that, I'd be happy to help." She smiled. "What's the problem?" "First, I'm married." "Oh," she replied, surprised. "I didn't know that. That's a little weird." "It's not what you think," I said. "I haven't seen or spoken to my wife in over 9 months. I don't even know if we're still married." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you file for separation or divorce?"
No.
"What else?" "I don't have anything appropriate to wear. No suit, no jacket, no regular shoes. Don't worry about it. I can take care of that. I'm asking because I think you'll be good company for the event. I work nights, but I think I can get a free night with no problem. I'll make it work." "Great. Also, do you want to shave? I like your beard and hair, but you're a bit scruffy. Would you mind if I had my stylist take a look at you Friday afternoon?" "A stylist?" I groaned, but nodded. "Okay." And so began my professional relationship with Henry, also known as Harlan Carter, attorney at law. On Tuesday, I found myself at Andrew L. Collins, which wasn't exactly top tier, but it was a step up from anywhere I had shopped before. Henry had arranged the visit ahead of time. I ended up buying 2 pairs of pants, 2 sports jackets, a couple of shirts, and some ties. I felt a bit uneasy when I added 2 turtlenecks to the pile, but I'd always liked them and thought they'd look good with the sport coats. Henry had already taken care of the bill. On the way home, I grabbed a new pair of shoes and some underwear to replace the ones I'd outgrown after my weight loss. The moccasins I chose were stylish but still comfortable. Friday came, and my visit to the stylist went smoothly. The stylist was easy to talk to and did a great job. He trimmed my beard neatly and turned my ponytail into a modified mullet, shorter on the sides but longer in the back. He assured me it would be easier to maintain, and I liked the result. When Henry arrived at my apartment at 6 o'clock sharp, she didn't get out of the car but called out to me. The Lexus she drove stood out in my neighborhood. I wore a gray jacket and a matching turtleneck, thinking I looked good, though I had no real point of reference. As Henry drove, I asked her what I should expect for the evening. She explained that the first hour would likely be filled with socializing. "Don't get worked up," she said. "Most people here will be big, pretentious snobs. Avoid them if you can. Just stay close to me and keep the snobs away. You don't have to be in the spotlight, but don't let anyone push you around. Make sure I always have a drink in my hand, ginger ale or mineral water. Just be friendly and calm, and let them think we're a couple." I hadn't thought much about it before, but I agreed. I wasn't sure what I was getting into, but I was willing to play along. "Will they feed us?" I asked. About an hour in, Henry replied, "We'll get some rubber chicken and some speeches. After that, they'll give us something else." It hit me then that I hadn't even complimented her on her dress or hair, which only made me feel more out of place. The first part of the evening played out exactly as she described. The room was full of men in expensive suits with flashy watches, and Henry stood out as one of the most attractive women there. It wasn't long before they began approaching her, trying to test the waters. I couldn't help but shoot them disapproving looks. To my surprise, every time I stepped away to refresh her drink, another guy would swoop in. Some even brought her drinks, which she calmly handed off to me to dispose of. Henry gave me a couple of quick glances and smiled. Finally, the 300 rubber chicken dinners arrived, and they were just as unappetizing as expected. I wasn't usually a picky eater, but this was something else. It wasn't long before Henry leaned over and asked, "Do you want to leave?" Without saying a word, I stood up, took her hand, and we quietly slipped out. In the garage, she kicked off her shoes and tossed me the keys to the Lexus. "Find us some real food," she said. 20 minutes later, we were sitting at Village Willie's, enjoying a full meal and a glass of beer. As we ate, I noticed something odd. Her evening gown had long sleeves, unlike the sleeveless dresses most women wore to events like this. She was also barefoot, but it didn't seem to bother her. The rest of the night went by comfortably, though it ended without any intimacy between us. We fell back into our usual routine at the gym. 3 weeks later, Henry needed an escort again, and I agreed. I decided to give my boss a heads up, and he found it amusing, telling me there was no need to formally request time off, just leave him a note. He basically said I was in charge of my own schedule. As for Henry's workouts, they were intense. She worked hard, sweat dripping as her heart rate increased, but she always wore sweatshirts and long pants. Meanwhile, the other women at the gym wore sports bras and shorts. It didn't make much sense to me, but I kept that observation to myself. Our second night was similar to the first, except there was no food, just more alcohol. And more booze meant more unwanted attention. Every guy who approached brought a fresh drink, and most of the evening I found myself collecting and disposing of glasses. One particularly obnoxious guy finally pushed me too far, so I took him aside and quietly warned him that if he ever harassed my fiancée again, I'd punch his face. After that, he disappeared for the rest of the night, like many others who had been lurking around. I didn't realize how intimidating I had become. After the event, we went out for sushi, though we ended up spending $40 on sashimi. It was another fun, platonic evening. 2 days later, Henry caught me off guard while I was rowing. "Why didn't you tell me we were engaged?" she asked. I was a bit embarrassed when one of my coworkers asked me that, but she didn't wait for an answer and just smiled. I called Nina later. She said Diana had been avoiding her and Caroline, and all Nina knew was that Diana had been traveling a lot and hosting people at her house. I asked if her mother had filed for divorce, but she didn't know. It had been weeks since she'd heard from Diana. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. As I emptied more bottles, my frustration grew. The next morning, I sent 74 valve stems to Grant Thompson at Kingston Industries, with a short note. "Thanks for a fun evening." It had been over a year since that party, but I was sure he remembered it. I skipped the gym that day. I wasn't in the mood to work out with a hangover. The following day, I got a call from Henry. I promised to explain everything the next time we had dinner together. She picked me up at 6 p.m. and took me to Chris's Steakhouse, a place I had never been before. She listened silently as I explained things, not making any judgments. After dinner, I got back to my apartment just in time for my shift at work. The next day at the gym, Henry asked me if I knew anyone who had been at the cabin that night. When I told her I had the names and addresses of everyone who was there, her eyes lit up. After our training session, she stopped by my place and I gave her an envelope with 12 car registration sheets. She grabbed them eagerly and kissed me on the cheek. "There are many types of lawyers," Henry said, explaining that she was a personal injury lawyer. She tried to explain it to me, but I just smiled and asked, "What's it going to cost me?" All I got in response was another kiss on the cheek. 3 days later, I got a call from my daughter Caroline. Diana had reached out to ask if Caroline knew where I was. Apparently, there was a problem at Diana's workplace, and she was in the middle of it. She was upset and wanted to talk to me immediately, but Caroline refused to give her any information. I couldn't help but wonder if Grant had received those valve stems. I called Henry and told her I'd pick her up in 20 minutes. Her office was in an upscale shopping center, nice, but not too flashy. Henry had never seen a Challenger before, and the sound of the engine caught the attention of a few curious onlookers. As she walked to the car, I walked around to open the door for her, smiling at the gawkers. Henry laughed as she got in and said, "Well played, Edward." "Well played." I suppose you'll want an engagement ring now, she asked. In due time, I replied. Take your time. I kept the Challenger under control until we crossed the Tennessee River, then I gave it a little more gas. Highway 72 leading into Huntsville was a good stretch of road, but not the best place to show off. 2 hours later, we were sitting in dreamland. All the people who were at the cabin that night have been served today, Henry said. Served? I asked. What do you mean? It's a lawsuit. The actual term is malicious behavior contributing to the deterioration of a marriage. Does such a thing really exist? I asked. It appears that all the necessary categories have been met. Their behavior was intentional, extreme, and caused you severe emotional distress. That must be why my wife was upset, I muttered. What do you mean, your wife was upset? Henry asked. My daughter Caroline called me today. Diana needed to talk to me. There's a big problem at work, and somehow, she's involved in it. I'm not sure about the details, but Grant Thompson and Kingston Industries are being sued for $1 million, while the other 11 people are facing lawsuits for $100,000 each. I couldn't help but ask Henry, do you really think this is going to work? She confidently replied, of course it will. It won't be easy, but I think it'll lead to some interesting developments. As we left the restaurant, I felt a bit nervous and casually asked Henry if she wanted to get a room and come back in the morning. She replied, I'd like to, but I can't. If you want, we can leave early, but it was clear that wasn't the point. Let's just go, she added. I'll explain everything on the way home. The car ride was quiet for about 20 minutes before she started talking. Henry shared that 8 years ago, she had weighed almost 300 pounds and chose diet and exercise over surgery to lose weight. She had shed 140 pounds, but it came with the challenge of 20 pounds of excess skin. It took 5 surgeries to remove the extra skin, leaving her with scars all over her body. Henry, being brave and outspoken, admitted she felt self-conscious about her scars and had avoided dating or interacting with male friends. Despite this, she felt comfortable around me, though she wasn't sure why. After dropping her off at her house, I walked her to the door and kissed her lightly on the cheek. She thanked me for dinner, and as I left, I noticed a small tear in her eye. We continued our platonic relationship, both content with the dynamic. Meanwhile, Jack's Markets, which had expanded by adding 2 stores in less than 2 years, offered me a full-time position as inventory manager. They required me to become a permanent employee, which meant being fully legalized, and I agreed. A few weeks passed, and I didn't hear from my daughters until I received a text saying, Mom got fired. This made things more complicated, as I now had a steady job and Diana was out of work. I worried it might affect my divorce. Then Henry shared some good news. 3 of the 11 people we had sued had settled. Their insurance companies advised them to pay the $100,000 each to avoid a public lawsuit. Henry had already received 3 checks, and she anticipated more. I asked, do you think this is connected to Diana getting fired? She confirmed, yes, of course it is. I asked Henry, is this going to mess up my divorce? She asked if I had filed the papers yet, and I said no. Well, let's take care of that, she smiled. Pack a bag and get the Challenger ready. We're visiting your wife. We left early Thursday morning, checking into the Sharon Hotel after a long drive. The next day, I called Caroline to arrange for Diana and Nina to have lunch. Dinner that evening was awkward. We avoided addressing the elephant in the room, the fact that Henry and I had spent our first night together in over a year. We had been friends without benefits before, and neither of us wanted to make the situation uncomfortable. The night turned out better than expected, though. Despite being a bit rusty, we managed to get through it. Henry seemed relieved that I wasn't disgusted, and I was happy it wasn't as bad as I had feared. We were a couple of happy fools. The next morning, we had a late breakfast. Diana and the girls were already at the table, and I looked good in my new sport coat with a dark turtleneck. Henry was dressed in a light business suit, casual yet professional. Diana, Caroline, and Nina were visibly surprised by my appearance. I introduced Henry to my family. Diana, Caroline, Nina, this is Harlan Carter, my confidant and attorney. Harlan, these are my wife Diana and daughters Caroline and Nina. It was awkward, but it was the best I could do. Before the silence could stretch further, the waiter arrived to take our order. Diana quickly broke the tension, saying, I'll just have coffee, and I quickly added, just bring us 5 cups of coffee and leave the coffee pot on the table. The waiter nodded, and everyone seemed to relax. Diana smirked slightly and asked, Bill, could you tell us what you've been up to the last few years? I replied, just working and giving you the freedom to find yourself or whatever. Henry lightly kicked me under the table, and I could feel the tension rising. I needed you, and you left me, she said, her voice steady. Maybe you needed someone, but not me? Mom, Dad, drop it, Caroline interrupted, sensing the growing discomfort. I'm sure you didn't set up this meeting to sit around and tease each other. Dad, why are we here? Caroline's persistence made it clear this meeting wasn't going to last long. I felt at a loss for what to do next. I glanced at Henry, hoping for some direction, but she ignored me and took charge of the conversation. Henry pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table toward Diana. Mrs. Adams, this is a divorce petition. I think you'll find it very fair. I suggest you take it to your attorney for review. Nina and Caroline looked shocked, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Diana, on the other hand, smiled broadly but didn't take the envelope from Henry. Instead, she reached into her own purse and pulled out an envelope. You're stupid, she said. I divorced your weak ass 8 months ago for desertion. You never got a copy because I didn't know where to send it. That's final. Anyway, you don't have anything left to claim. Her smile turned into a wide grin as the waiter returned with our coffee and a vase for the table. Just as Diana stood up, she smiled at Henry and me and gave the girls a strange look before walking away, leaving both envelopes behind on the table. Can we stay for lunch? Nina asked, looking at the waiter. I heard they have really good custard pie here. Henry and I laughed, then asked the waiter to bring the menu. Nina, Caroline, and Henry enjoyed a lively conversation over lunch, while I felt like I was eating alone, lost in my thoughts. I never quite understood women. Afterward, the girls exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. Back in my room, I started packing. Edward, I thought we were staying one more night? Henry asked, noticing my hurried movements. We are, but not here, I replied, urging her to hurry. Pack up. An hour and a half later, we were driving to Elton, Maryland. 30 minutes later, Harlan Carter became Henry Adams again. We spent the night in Luray, Virginia, in a house with a 3-car garage, a whole other story. It wasn't long before I learned that Diana had a seizure upon hearing that I had received over $1.5 million from Kingston Industries. Diana moved to Iowa shortly after, though I never knew why. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
From heartbreak to healing, a husband's journey of self-worth after discovering his wife's affair. James leaned back in his office chair, staring at the photo on his desk, a candid picture of him and Emma on their anniversary trip to Italy. In the photo, Emma's smile was radiant, her arms wrapped around him like she couldn't bear to let go. Perfect, people always said about them. What a perfect couple! But perfection was a fragile illusion, and James was about to see how easily it could shatter. It was a Wednesday when James decided to surprise Emma. He had closed a major deal at work and wanted to celebrate with a quiet dinner at home. As he walked through the door, the faint aroma of her vanilla-scented candle greeted him. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, buzzing incessantly. Buzz. Buzz. Chris, last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. The words stared back at him, each one a dagger in his chest. His hands felt cold as he scrolled further. The messages were explicit: photos, promises of stolen weekends, and confessions of love. James's world came crashing down in that moment, but instead of exploding in anger, he felt a strange calmness settle over him. James didn't confront Emma that night. Instead, he cooked the dinner he had planned, masking his emotions behind a practiced smile. Emma came home later than usual, a faint whiff of cologne clinging to her scarf, one that wasn't his. Hey, honey, she said, kissing his cheek as if nothing was wrong. Long day? James asked, his tone betraying none of the storm brewing inside him. Exhausting, she replied, avoiding eye contact. James clenched his fists under the table but kept his demeanor calm. He realized he didn't need a confrontation. He didn't want to beg for answers or forgiveness. What he wanted was clarity, and the space to rediscover who he was. The next morning, James woke up early and hit the gym for the first time in years. Each press of the weights, each step on the treadmill, felt like shedding layers of pain. By the end of the week, he had signed up for a painting class at a local studio, something he had always loved but had abandoned for Emma's sake. Days turned into weeks, and James's routine became a quiet rebellion. He stopped asking Emma about her late nights, stopped planning weekend getaways to rekindle the spark. Instead, he poured his energy into himself. At work, his colleagues noticed the change. "James, you look incredible," his coworker Lisa said one day. "New diet or something?" James smiled. "Something like that." At home, Emma began to feel the shift. He no longer waited up for her. He no longer lingered during their conversations. If she noticed his growing confidence, the way he walked with his shoulders back and his chin high, she didn't mention it, but she noticed. One evening, James came home later than usual. Emma was in the living room, scrolling through her phone. "You're home late," she said, her tone tinged with irritation. "Had a meeting with a gallery owner," James replied, setting down his bag. "A gallery owner?" she asked, frowning. "I've been painting again," James said casually. "Turns out, people like my work." Emma stared at him, a flicker of something, jealousy, unease, crossing her face. "That's great," she said, forcing a smile. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. James had always been hers, hadn't he? He had always been predictable, stable, devoted. But now, he was slipping away, and she didn't know how to stop it. The final blow came 3 months later. James had organized a charity gala for his firm, inviting friends, clients, and local artists. Emma arrived fashionably late, expecting to find James waiting for her. Instead, she found him in deep conversation with a stunning woman, Natalie, a gallery owner who had been showcasing his paintings. The woman's laughter rang out as she lightly touched James's arm. Emma's heart sank. Later that night, when they were finally alone, Emma couldn't hold back. "Who was that woman?" she demanded. James raised an eyebrow. "Natalie? She's a gallery owner. Why?" "She seemed close to you," Emma said, her voice wavering. James sighed, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Emma, I think we need to talk." He pulled a letter from his pocket and handed it to her. "I wrote this months ago when I found out about you and Chris." Emma's eyes widened, her hands trembling as she opened the letter. "Dear Emma, I found the messages. I know about Chris. But instead of hating you, I decided to focus on myself. You see, I realized that your betrayal wasn't just about you. It was about the fact that I had stopped valuing myself. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she looked up at him. "James, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please, we can fix this." But James shook his head. "I've already fixed the—" His art continued to thrive, with galleries across the city vying to showcase his work. Natalie remained a constant presence in his life, not just as a business partner, but as a friend and confidant. Slowly, their connection deepened into something more. One evening, as they walked along the river, Natalie turned to him and said, "You're the most resilient person I've ever met, James. You turned something so painful into something so beautiful." James smiled, his hand brushing against hers. "It's funny. For the longest time, I thought my life was over. But now I realize it was just beginning." They paused at the riverbank, the city lights reflecting on the water. For the first time in years, James felt truly free, free from betrayal, free from bitterness, free to love again. Closing reflection. The story ends with James standing in his studio, painting a canvas filled with bold, radiant colors. The painting, titled Renewal, depicted a phoenix rising from ashes, its wings ablaze with golden light. Sometimes life's greatest heartbreaks are the seeds of our greatest transformations. It's not the pain that defines us, but how we rise from it. And in rising, we find not just strength, but the freedom to live fully, authentically, and unapologetically. His art continued to thrive, with galleries across the city vying to showcase his work. Natalie remained a constant presence in his life, not just as a business partner, but as a friend and confidant. Slowly, their connection deepened into something more. One evening, as they walked along the river, Natalie turned to him and said, "You're the most resilient person I've ever met, James. You turned something so painful into something so beautiful." James smiled, his hand brushing against hers. "It's funny. For the longest time, I thought my life was over. But now I realize it was just beginning." They paused at the riverbank, the city lights reflecting on the water. For the first time in years, James felt truly free, free from betrayal, free from bitterness, free to love again. Closing reflection. The story ends with James standing in his studio, painting a canvas filled with bold, radiant colors. The painting, titled Renewal, depicted a phoenix rising from ashes, its wings ablaze with golden light. Sometimes life's greatest heartbreaks are the seeds of our greatest transformations. It's not the pain that defines us, but how we rise from it. And in rising, we find not just strength, but the freedom to live fully, authentically, and unapologetically.
I usually don't ask this early, but if you could like the video and subscribe, it would mean a lot. We're so close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support can really help get my content out there. Thanks. It was an ordinary day like any other. Emile Trudeau, 42, had just returned from his usual Saturday morning routine, a trip to the farmer's market followed by a brisk walk around Montreal's Parc La Fontaine. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm, much different from the whirlwind of chaos it had once been. His son, Louis, now 18, was away at university studying mechanical engineering, a far cry from the broken, confused child Emile had comforted through countless sleepless nights. The memories of those darker days occasionally surfaced, but Emile had long since learned how to keep them at bay. That is, until the doorbell rang. At first, Emile thought nothing of it. The postman, perhaps. A delivery he'd forgotten about. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, shaking off the water from washing dishes, and headed toward the front door. But as soon as he opened it, his heart stopped. Standing there, framed by the cool September air, was Marguerite Tremblay. Marguerite, the woman who had once been his wife, the woman who had shattered their family a decade ago, the woman who had vanished from their lives without a word, leaving Emile to pick up the pieces of their broken home. And she wasn't alone. A little girl, no older than 5 or 6, clung to her side. Marguerite's face, once radiant with youth and confidence, looked older, more tired. Her once well-kept auburn hair now had streaks of gray, her skin marked by lines of stress and time. She was a far cry from the woman who had walked out of his life all those years ago. But those eyes, those same green eyes that had once captured his heart, now looked up at him, pleading silently for something he wasn't sure he could give. "Emile," Marguerite began, her voice shaky, "I know this is unexpected, but I need your help." For a moment, Emile just stood there, frozen. It was as though time itself had stopped, and he was thrust back 10 years to that fateful day when everything had fallen apart. He could still hear the echoes of her final words before she left. "I can't do this anymore. I need to find myself. I need to be happy." Marguerite had left him for another man, a decision that had blindsided Emile. One day, they had been a family, and the next, she was gone. It was a betrayal that had cut deeper than any wound Emile had ever known. And now, after all this time, she was standing at his doorstep, with another man's child, no less, asking for something. But what? Forgiveness? Redemption? Emile felt a surge of emotions rising in his chest. Anger, confusion, disbelief. "I made a mistake," Marguerite continued, her voice cracking. She glanced down at the little girl by her side, her hand gripping the child's tighter. "I left because I thought I needed something else, but I was wrong. I see that now. I've been through a lot, Emile. The man I left you for, he's gone. He left me. And now, I don't have anywhere else to go." Emile blinked, trying to process the weight of her words. The sheer audacity of her showing up like this, after 10 years, after all the hurt she had caused, was almost laughable. He clenched his jaw, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the woman who had once been his world. But now she was nothing more than a ghost from a past he had worked so hard to bury. "You made your choice," Emil said coldly, his voice hard and unyielding. You walked out on us, on Louis, and now what? You think you can just waltz back in like nothing happened? Marguerite flinched at his words, her face paling. I know I hurt you. I hurt Louis. But I want to make things right. I want to be a family again. I miss him. I miss you. Emil felt his heart twist at the mention of Louis. Their son, who had been only 8 years old when Marguerite left, had been devastated by her departure. He had cried for days, weeks even, asking why his mother didn't love him enough to stay. And now, after all those years of trying to fill that void, of trying to be both father and mother to his son, Marguerite had the nerve to show up and ask to be a part of their lives again? The little girl by Marguerite's side tugged at her sleeve, her eyes wide and confused. "Mommy, who is he?" she whispered. Emil's gaze dropped to the child. She had curly brown hair and freckles dotting her cheeks. Clearly, she wasn't his daughter. Another man's child brought into his life without warning or consent. The thought made his stomach churn. "This is Elise," Marguerite said softly, her eyes flickering with guilt. "She's my daughter, from my previous relationship." Previous relationship, Emil thought bitterly. The same relationship you left me for? His hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. It was all too much. The memories of their shattered marriage, the sleepless nights, the loneliness. It all came flooding back in a rush of emotion. He had spent years building a new life for himself and Louis. Years of therapy, of trying to make peace with what had happened. And now, in the blink of an eye, Marguerite was back, threatening to tear it all apart again. "No," Emil said, his voice low but firm. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to show up out of the blue and ask to be part of our lives again. You made your choice, Marguerite. You chose him over us." Marguerite's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step forward, her hand reaching out as if to touch him. "Please, Emil. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I see that now. I want to fix things. I want us to be a family again. For Elise." For Louis, Emil stepped back, his body rigid with anger. "Louis doesn't need you," he spat. "He's grown up. He's in college now, and I was there for him every step of the way. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who raised him." Tears streamed down Marguerite's face as she listened to his words. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you, Emil, for the sake of our son, for the sake of Elise, who doesn't have anyone else. Please." For a moment, Emil hesitated. He looked at the little girl, who was watching the exchange with wide, innocent eyes. She didn't ask for this. She didn't ask to be caught in the middle of her mother's mistakes. But even as pity flickered in his heart, the overwhelming anger and betrayal he felt wouldn't let him give in. "No," Emil said finally, his voice steely. "You lost your chance. You lost your family. You need to live with that." And with that, he slammed the door in her face. Emil stood behind the closed door, his hands trembling. He leaned against the frame, the weight of the encounter pressing heavily on his chest. Outside, he could still hear Marguerite's muffled sobs as she stood there, probably hoping he would open the door again. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. His mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, memories of the life they once shared flashing before his eyes. They had been so happy, or at least he thought they had been. Marguerite had always been full of life, adventurous and free-spirited. She had been the kind of woman who couldn't sit still, always chasing the next big thing, always seeking excitement. But Emil, he had been content with the simple things. A steady job, a loving home, their son. For a while, that balance worked. They complemented each other in ways that made their relationship feel right. But somewhere along the way, Marguerite's hunger for more had driven a wedge between them. She had grown restless, distant. Emile had noticed it, but he hadn't known how to fix it. And then, one day she was gone. Gone to pursue what she thought would make her happy. But now, 10 years later, she was back. And she expected him to welcome her with open arms? To pretend as if the past decade had never happened? It was absurd. A sudden knock at the door startled Emile from his thoughts. He hesitated for a moment, thinking it might be Marguerite again. But when he opened the door, he found his neighbor, René Bouchard, standing there with a concerned expression. "Everything all right, Emile?" René asked, glancing toward the street where Marguerite had already disappeared from view. "Saw someone at your door? Seemed a bit tense?" Emile forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just an old ghost," René Chuck led, though there was a note of understanding in his eyes. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me." After René left, Emile finally allowed himself to breathe. He sank into the armchair by the window, staring out at the street. The encounter with Marguerite had dredged up emotions he thought he'd buried long ago. He had moved on, or at least he thought he had. But seeing her again, hearing her voice, it had all come rushing back. What did she expect? Did she think time had healed everything, that he would simply forgive her and take her back? He couldn't. Not after everything she had put him and Louis through. Louis. Emile's heart clenched at the thought of his son. Louis had been so young when Marguerite left, barely old enough to understand what was happening. He had cried for days, asking why his mother didn't love him enough to stay. Emile had tried his best to fill that void, but he knew it had left scars. Scars that Louis carried even now. What would Louis say if he knew his mother had shown up today? Would he want to see her? Or would he feel the same anger and betrayal Emile felt? Emile wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let Marguerite waltz back into their lives and disrupt everything they had worked so hard to rebuild. It was a late Sunday afternoon when Louis returned home for the weekend. He had called Emile earlier in the week, saying he needed a break from the pressures of university life and wanted to spend some time with his father. As Emile stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, he heard the familiar sound of the front door creaking open. "Dad, I'm home," Louis called out, his voice filled with the same boyish enthusiasm he had always carried, despite being on the cusp of adulthood. Emile smiled to himself, the tension from the previous day easing slightly. "In the kitchen," he replied, stirring a pot of stew on the stove. Louis, now 18 and standing taller than his father, walked into the kitchen with a grin on his face. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and he had a worn-out look that spoke of late-night study sessions and long days in the lecture halls. "Smells amazing," Louis said as he grabbed a spoon and dipped it into the stew for a taste. "Hey, wait for dinner," Emile laughed, swatting his son's hand away playfully. "It'll be ready in a bit." Louis leaned against the counter, his expression softening as he looked at his father. "It's good to be home," he said quietly. "I've missed this." Emile's heart warmed at his son's words. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the struggles they had faced over the years, they had built something strong together, a bond that no one, not even Marguerite, could break. As they sat down to dinner, Emile couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to tell Louis about Marguerite's visit. But how? How could he bring up something so painful, something that had the potential to reopen old wounds? After a few moments of silence, Emile finally spoke. "Louis, there's something I need to tell you." Louis looked up from his plate, his brow furrowed in concern. "What is it, Dad?" Emile took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Your mother. She showed up yesterday." Louis's fork clattered to the table as he stared at his father in shock. "What? Mom? Here?" Emil nodded, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. She came to the house. She's got another child, a little girl. She wanted to talk, to be a family again. For a moment, Louis was silent, his face a mask of disbelief. Then, slowly, anger began to seep into his features. She thinks she can just come back? After all this time? After everything she did? Emil nodded, his heart heavy. That's what I told her. I told her she lost her chance. Louis clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he fought to control his emotions. She doesn't get to do that, he said quietly, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. She doesn't get to just walk back into our lives like nothing happened. Emil reached across the table, placing a hand on his son's. I know, Louis, and I'm not letting her. I slammed the door in her face. Louis looked at his father, his eyes filled with gratitude and pain. Thank you, Dad, he said softly, for always being there, for never giving up on me. Emil smiled, his heart swelling with pride. You're my son, Louis. I'll always be here for you. Always. The days passed, and the memory of Marguerite's visit began to fade. Life returned to its usual rhythm, with Louis coming home on weekends and Emil continuing his quiet routine. But the encounter had left a lasting impact on Emil, a reminder of the pain they had endured and the strength they had found in each other. One evening, as Emil sat by the fireplace, a knock came at the door once again. His heart skipped a beat, but this time, when he opened it, there was no one there. Just the soft whisper of the wind and the distant hum of the city. A small envelope lay on the doorstep, with his name scrawled in familiar handwriting. He picked it up, hesitating for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message from Marguerite. Emil, I'm sorry. I truly am. I understand now that I can never undo what I've done, and I can never be the family you and Louis deserve. I hope one day you can forgive me. But I won't ask for it. I'll be moving away with Elise, starting a new life elsewhere. I wish you and Louis nothing but happiness. Marguerite. Emil stood there for a moment, staring at the letter. He felt no anger, no bitterness, just a sense of closure. He folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket, then turned and closed the door behind him. As he sat down by the fire once more, a feeling of peace settled over him. Life would go on, and so would they. Thank you for watching this emotional journey. Do you think Emil made the right choice by shutting the door on Marguerite? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping stories like this one.
Hello, I'm Grace, and I'd like to tell you about my challenging marriage. It all started 5 years ago. When I met Thomas, it set the stage for a journey I never anticipated. I was excelling in my career as a senior marketing manager at a prestigious tech company, a job that brought immense satisfaction and a handsome salary. I was the breadwinner of our household for a while, as Thomas faced intermittent unemployment. Thomas was pursuing his dream of becoming a writer, and I was his biggest cheerleader. He had a charm that could make anyone smile, and writing was his passion. I believed he would make it big someday. Despite my own demanding career, I made sure to support his dream all the way. We often stayed up late, discussing the life we were going to build together. Thomas sometimes took odd jobs to help out, but I always told him not to worry. I was happy to support us while he figured things out. We had unshakable faith in each other's dreams and were ready to ride the ups and downs together. Now, let me tell you about Mary, my sister-in-law who lived in the captivating city of Auckland, New Zealand. While we weren't extremely close, I considered her part of our extended family. Thomas had always been fond of his little sister despite their age gap. She was only 23. Thomas often shared stories of their childhood, showing how deeply he cared for her. Though Mary and I hadn't formed a particularly tight bond, I cherished the moments we shared during family gatherings. She had a youthful zest for life. Mary's decision to study abroad was a bold one, and everyone supported it. One evening, after a grueling day at the office, I came home with aching feet, ready to relax. But Thomas, with his cheeky smile, had other plans. "Grace, there's something I need to discuss with you," he said. "Of course, Thomas. What's on your mind?" "It's about Mary. Her health has taken a serious hit, and the medical expenses in Oakland are astronomical. She reached out to me for help. Can we send her some money?" "Absolutely, Thomas." "What happened to her?" "She's been dealing with some stomach issues, and the doctors are running tests to figure out what's wrong." "Oh no, poor Mary. We'll definitely help her." "Thanks, babe. I hate to burden you with this, but she's my sister, and I can't stand the thought of her suffering. You know I've been between jobs for a while now, and my savings are running low. Mary just graduated and is actively looking for a job, but it's not easy for her in her field. Family comes first, Thomas, and we'll make sure she gets the help she needs." "How much does she need?" "Just $5,000. I know it's a lot. We'll tighten our belts if we have to. It's the least we can do." "You're amazing, Grace. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I find a stable job. I hate that it's come to this, but I'm so grateful for your support. Don't worry about paying me back, Thomas. Family sticks together no matter what." Without a second thought, I agreed to send the money. It was a decision made out of love, compassion, and a belief that family always comes first. I saw the genuine concern in Thomas's eyes for his sister's well-being and couldn't bear to see him burdened by worry. After all, what good was the money? I earned it. If I couldn't use it to help the people I cared about the most, then what was the point? I have always believed that wealth holds no real value unless it's used to make a positive impact on the lives of those you love. It wasn't about the amount or the inconvenience. It was about standing by Thomas's side and showing solidarity with his family. So, I transferred the money to Mary. Little did I know that this simple act of generosity would trigger a series of events that would turn my life upside down. A few weeks later, Thomas informed me that his mom, Charlotte, was making a spontaneous trip to Oakland to be with Mary. He explained that Charlotte was deeply concerned about her daughter's health and that he needed to drive her to the airport. As soon as I heard this, I knew I wanted to accompany them. I wanted to meet Charlotte before her flight, offering her some support and comfort during this stressful time. Even though Thomas said I didn't need to, I insisted. "So, Thomas, how's Mary doing? What's her exact diagnosis?" "Well, it's a bit complicated, Grace. She's been having these stomach issues, and the doctors are still trying to figure it out." "Yes, dear," Thomas chimed in. "They haven't pinpointed the exact cause yet. It's been quite a struggle for her." "Stomach issues? That sounds vague. But she's been going to the doctor regularly, right?" "Oh yes, she's seen a few specialists, but they haven't concluded anything yet. It's been frustrating. Darling, we are hopeful she will get better soon. I'm going there to take better care of her. That's all a mother can do, you know." "I hope so too. It's just strange that it's been a while and they haven't reached a diagnosis yet. For someone as young as her to have such issues. Let it go, Grace. Let's just focus on getting Mom to the airport right now." While Charlotte was away in Oakland, life continued as usual. I headed to work while Thomas stayed home, working on his novel. Another month passed, and then Thomas approached me with another request for money. He explained that Mary was relocating for a new job and needed financial help for her new apartment. Charlotte was still in Oakland with her, and from what I knew, Charlotte was wealthy enough to support Mary comfortably. Despite my doubts, I couldn't bring myself to question Thomas's family. I quietly sent Mary the requested $33,000, hoping this time it would truly benefit her. But then, a week later, Thomas dropped a bombshell that left me utterly flabbergasted. "Grace, I need to ask you for something. Something big." "What is it, Thomas?" "I need you to send my sister $50,000. $50,000. Thomas, that's half of my annual salary. Why on earth would Mary need that much money?" "Mary's health is deteriorating rapidly. It's a serious stomach condition, and the doctor recommends surgery. She's in pain, and we can't wait any longer." "I get that, Thomas, but why can't you just tell me exactly what's wrong with her? It's so frustrating not knowing. You're always so vague about it. And why couldn't Charlotte help with the $3,000 last time? First, it was for a diagnosis, then an apartment, and now a surgery. Charlotte has her own expenses, Grace. She's been helping Mary too, but this situation is just beyond what any of us expected. I understand, but it's just so hard to keep giving money without knowing where it's going. It's complicated, Grace. I wish I could explain it better, but it's a medical thing, and Mary's privacy matters too. I'm not asking for every detail, just something more than some stomach issue, Thomas. Grace, please, this is about her life. I can't believe you're questioning this. I'm not questioning Mary's health. I just want some proof. You think I would lie about my own sister's health? I cannot believe you're being so heartless about this. I am not being heartless, Thomas. I am scared. I need to protect our future too. I can't drain our savings without knowing more. You know what, Grace? If you can't trust me on this, maybe we don't have a future together. I wouldn't want a divorce if you don't help me. Are you seriously threatening me with divorce over this? I thought you would support me when my family needs it the most. I want to support your family, but I also need to know I'm not being taken advantage of. If you won't share the truth, I can't keep sending money blindly. You're unbelievable, Grace. Fine, do what you want. But remember, you are making this choice. Don't go around telling everyone that I left you when it's completely your fault. I plopped down on the couch, feeling the weight of Thomas's request pressing on me. Thoughts swirled in my head like a blender on high speed. Why all the secrecy? First, it was for Mary's diagnosis, then an apartment, and now surgery. It just didn't add up. I sat there, wrestling with my thoughts. On one hand, there was my undying love for Thomas. I didn't want to see him hurt or upset, and family always came first for me. But on the other hand, something just didn't feel right. I needed some proof, some clarity, but all I got were vague explanations. In the end, my love for Thomas and my sense of family loyalty won out. I made the payment to Mary. She texted me a thank you note. As the sun rose the next morning, I broke the news to Thomas. I'm sorry for doubting you, Thomas. I transferred the money to Mary. You did, Grace. You are the best. I'm sorry for last night. The divorce thing just came out of my mouth. I didn't really mean it. No matter how hard I tried to play along, something just didn't sit right. Even after sending Mary the money, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than met the eye. Thomas had threatened me with divorce the previous night, but once I sent the money, he transformed back into Mr. Charming. I couldn't ignore it. Why all the secrecy about Mary's health? Why wasn't Charlotte stepping up to help her own daughter when she was struggling? It was a blast. Jenny wore this stunning red dress that would make anyone jealous. You know, the usual stuff, food, gossip, and a lot of dancing. Typical Jenny, making an entrance. Why weren't you there, by the way? Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Thomas and I had a fight. No way, Grace. What's going on? Well, you know my sister-in-law Mary in New Zealand, right? She's been asking for money, claiming it's for her health issues. Yeah, I remember seeing her at your wedding. She was just a kid then. What's her deal? Something feels off. I sent her some money before, but now she's asking me to send a huge chunk of my salary, and he threatened to divorce me if I didn't. That does not sound right. That was a shitty move on Thomas's part. Did you try talking to Mary directly? I did. I left her a few texts, but she was so vague about it. She just thanked me for the money and stuff. I don't know much about her anyway. You know, sometimes people spill more on social media than they intend to. Have you checked Mary's profiles? What's she up to? Mary isn't exactly on Facebook or Instagram. She's always been quite private. That is strange for a 23-year-old not to have any social media presence. Let me put my stalking skills to use. I took a quick break to grab the blueberry muffins and coffee we ordered from the counter, hoping to ease the tension. When I returned, Amon's face looked like she had seen a ghost. I leaned in and couldn't help but ask, "What's got you looking so shocked? Isn't this Mary? There she is on Instagram. Strange how I couldn't find her at first." Well, maybe she blocked you. Why would she do that? Take a look at her account. You're not going to like what you see. I started scrolling through Mary's Instagram, and, Manny, you will not believe this, Mary was at a Dua Lipa concert just a week ago. What on earth is going on? Not to mention how expensive those front row tickets would be. My heart sank as I scrolled through Mary's Instagram profile. There she was, living a life that seemed far from the struggles Thomas had described: fancy restaurants, designer bags and clothes, trips to Europe, and photos with internet personalities. Nothing about her life appeared to match the dire situation Thomas had painted. The final blow came when Amoni opened her Instagram story, showing Mary having a luxurious lunch with Charlotte at an upscale restaurant just 4 hours ago. Her follower count stood at around 20,000, a number that made her a budding Instagram influencer. How could someone with such a substantial online presence, who seemed to enjoy a life of luxury, be in financial straits as Thomas had claimed? Girl, she's flaunting a Gucci bag, and your husband claims she's broke. You'll definitely need to have a serious talk with Thomas, Amoni remarked. You're right, Amoni. I need to go. See you later. I dashed back home, my head swirling with thoughts, but Thomas was nowhere in sight. I couldn't sit still, so I restlessly paced the living room, my heart racing. Finally, Thomas walked through the door. Hey, baby, how was your day with Amoni? I asked. You're home early. It was very educational. I learned about a lot of things today. That's different. I just went for a walk to hit my daily step goal. Nice. You seem upset. Is everything all right with Amoni? Oh, come on, Thomas. Did you know about this or not? Know about what? I pulled out the screenshots of Mary's photos that Amoni had sent me. Thomas's face turned pale as he gazed at the screenshots. I could see the regret in his eyes. Where did you find these? It doesn't matter where I found them. The question is, did you know? Look me in the eyes and admit you've been keeping things from me. Thomas nodded reluctantly. Yes, I have. Why in the world would you lie about something like this? And where did all the money I worked hard for go? It's a complicated situation. I'm not accepting that as an answer. You better start talking. Mary needed money because she didn't finish college. She dropped out. What? And who was going to tell me that? You said she graduated. Yeah, I never told you. I lied. She wanted to become an influencer and needed money to maintain that lifestyle. I thought I could help her out. So you sent her money so she could splurge on designer clothes and bags and build a fake social media life. You don't understand, Grace. She realized college wasn't for her, so there was no illness, no surgery, no new job, and no new apartment. You lied to me, took the money I worked hard for, and threw it at your sister who just wanted to live a glamorous social media fantasy. What about Charlotte? Why did she fly out to Oakland? She's no saint. They come from a family of liars. They are actually planning to fly to Paris for an influencer event on Mother's Day. It's a thing where everyone brings their mother as their date. I can't believe you tried to sell me the story that your sister was seriously ill when in reality you needed money for these first-world problems. Please forgive me, Grace. And then you threatened to leave me, huh? Aaron, you are such a manipulator. I'm sorry. I seriously did not mean it, babe. Please, can I do anything to make it up to you? You want to make it up to me? Okay, let's divorce. You can't be serious. Yes, you threatened me with divorce, but you know what? Now I genuinely desire a divorce. Life got really messy at home. Thomas and I were living in different corners of our own house. I needed a break from more than lies, so I booked a flight to my parents' place. My flight was in 2 days, but just when I thought things could not get crazier, Mary herself rang me up one morning as I was having my coffee. I stared at my phone, wondering what on earth she wanted. Finally, I answered, Grace, you must listen carefully. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. Mary, what are you talking about? If you think about divorcing Thomas, it won't end well for you. You'll regret it. I can't keep sending you money for your so-called needs. You don't understand the situation, Grace. I have plans, and they involve you staying married to Thomas. The moment she started talking, I had this brilliant idea. I activated the recording feature on my phone, making sure to capture every word she said. You have no choice, Grace. Be a supportive sister-in-law or face the consequences. Threats won't change my mind. You think you can just walk away, Grace? You have no idea who you're dealing with. If you dare to divorce my brother, I'll make sure your life becomes a living hell. I have ways and connections you can't even imagine. Well, Mary, it seems like you have your bag of threats, but I have something too. You see, I've been recording this entire conversation. You can't be serious. Oh, but I am. And now I'm giving you 1 month to return every cent you took from me. Otherwise, say goodbye to that online empire you were trying to build. I'll leak this recording to make sure each one of your followers hears the truth. Grace, please don't do something drastic. Okay. Just give me some time, and I'll pay you back. I promise. 1 month, Mary. Don't test my patience again. In the end, I did get the money back from Mary. She wired it to my account a day before the 1-month deadline expired. Thomas and I, well, we couldn't fix what was broken. So, I went ahead and filed for divorce, which, let me tell you, was not a walk in the park. But hey, sometimes you have to do what is right for you. Being single again has its perks. Work is more exciting, socializing is a blast, and I'm living life on my own terms. I bought myself a new apartment, a place I can call my own. My family and friends often ask me how I manage to keep my spirits high through all that craziness. I just give them a huge smile and say, when people cross lines with you, sometimes you have to cross some lines too. Don't play the victim. Take control of your life and your happiness.